coming today, and I'm sorry for our technical difficulties this morning. Best laid plans. So I'm really glad you could join us today. We have a really wonderful presentation today with two experts in diplomacy that have been in the field for many years. We have Alan Dubose from the U.S. Department of State, and we have Ciara O'Flynn from the Consul General of Ireland. And we are delighted to have you here, and we're so grateful you've taken the time to speak with our students at the Global Studies Institute. Um, Alan, I'm going to share screen now. If you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I will pull up your presentation.
Sounds perfect. And hello, everybody. Again, my name is Alan Dubose, and I am a diplomat in residence with the U.S. Department of State, and that pretty much means I'm recruiting. We're kind of like the military, where we do tours, 2 years here or 3 years there. And so right now I'm recruiting. Now, what I'm going to do is go through a fairly short presentation. My entire presentation is normally about 35 to 40 minutes, but we don't need the entire thing. So I'm just going to go through and give an overview. And if you look in the chat, you're going to see that I'll put a comment, and I'm not going to do it now, but later on I'll put some information in about links to careers.state.gov. And that's where you can find probably 80 to 90% of what I'm going to talk about today. So if you would, let's go to the next page, please. Again, my name is Alan Dubose. I'm a diplomat in residence. If anybody wants to get in touch with me in the future to talk about careers with U.S. Foreign Service, I can be contacted at dubose@state.gov or dirsouth@state.gov. You'll see down the bottom left corner is the DIR South, and that's actually the better account because in the future you may want to contact me and I might have moved on to another assignment. What we're going to talk about today is what is the work of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Foreign Service? How is the U.S. Foreign Service organized? And what are some of the diplomatic career options? And just I inserted some photos throughout this brief presentation. Some are real, some I just took from our stock. But this is one where I am in Medellin, Colombia. And you can always know whenever you see somebody wearing that volte out, if you say a cowboy hat, you will insult them. That is the hat that's similar to a Texan wearing a cowboy hat. That's what they wear in the Medellin or Antioquia area of Colombia. Next slide, please. We're going to talk now. What is the U.S. Department's mission? U.S. State Department's mission is the U.S. State Department leads America's foreign policy. Now, we can continue on, but the bottom line is that's it. The U.S. Department of State leads America's foreign policy. So whatever the policy is that comes from the White House or works its way to us from the National Security Agency, the bottom line is we are the ones who are responsible for leading that implementation abroad, not domestically, abroad. And for what it's worth, this photo is also a real one. This is our operations center, and this is a cool place. This is somewhere that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never closes. It's one of the few places you look on TV and it looks just like that in real life. And that's because the world never closes. We are always responsible for something going on in the world. And this is our center of operations. Next slide, please. So who and where are we? Well, the U.S. Department of State is the oldest federal government agency and has led foreign policy since 1789. Well, what they did in 1924 start the process of taking the work that was more foreign oriented and cobble it together in what's called the U.S. Foreign Service. So we have the U.S. Department of State, and within the U.S. Department of State is the U.S. Foreign Service, headquartered in Washington, D.C., and have 276 posts abroad spread across 191 countries. So what I'm trying to explain within the parentheses is that a post can include an embassy or a consulate, and we'll hear more about the differences shortly. Whereas every one is going to be a mission. So each country would have a mission, but within that mission, you may have more than one post. We have approximately 69,000 employees, of whom 13,000 are foreign service employees, which is really not as many as one would think. We always tell everybody there are more Marines in the band than there are U.S. Foreign Service personnel. We have 11,000 civil service employees who support our foreign policy, but they do it from the states. And then we have 45,000 locally employed staff. And these are people who are very important to us because at our embassies and consulates abroad, every 2 to 3 years, we're rotating through. So we need someone on the ground who actually is going to stay there and who really knows how to get things done. And that's what we call locally employed staff. Next slide, please. Now, we're not going to go through this, trust me. This is what do we do? And this may surprise people that we're involved with things like, let's say, energy or the ocean and polar affairs or coronavirus. And the reality is I took this snapshot a few months ago. If I went back and did it again, it would change again. The bottom line is whatever is important to U.S. foreign policy, that's what the U.S. Department of State and U.S. Foreign Service is involved with. Next slide, please. So how are we structured? Again, we have U.S. Department of State, and many of the employees are what we call civil servants. Our civil servants are personnel who are posted usually domestically somewhere in the United States, and the overwhelming majority are posted in the D.C. area. They normally don't travel. Every once in a while they may, but in general, their job is no different than a civil servant working for another agency. It's just that they are supporting the U.S. Foreign Service and the Department of State mission. Now, the other branch, and the one we're going to talk about mostly now, is the U.S. Foreign Service. So these are the people we call the diplomats and the diplomatic corps. And we're broken down into two groups, Foreign Service officers and Foreign Service specialists. And we're expected to spend somewhere around 2/3 of our careers posted at embassies and consulates abroad. Next slide, please. So let's go through quickly, just for clarification and understanding. What is an embassy? This is the headquarters of the U.S. mission abroad, and it's governed by the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations Treaty of 1961 called the VCDR. So when people hear about diplomatic immunity and things like that, this is really a treaty. It's not necessarily some country's law. It's a treaty that countries signed on to, and this is what these embassies signed on to. The embassy is normally headed by a chief of mission, and that chief of mission is normally the ambassador and a deputy chief of mission. So the deputy chief of mission, think of as a chief operating officer, everything flows through, and then the chief of mission decides basically with their experience and knowledge what needs to go to the ambassador and for the ambassador to do and what the chief of mission is going to handle, which is usually more the administrative side. We also represent the office of the U.S. President in that foreign country. So this is Embassy Brasilia in Brazil. And if you go to the next slide, please, you'll see U.S. Consulate General Porto Alegre in Brazil. So this is a consulate. This basically, think of Brasilia as the headquarters, that's your embassy, and your consulate would be a branch. So they are governed by the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations Treaty in 1963. So instead of them reporting directly back to DC, they report to the ambassador in Brasilia, and the ambassador reports back to DC. So that's the flow of information, and that's why we normally use the synonymous terms chief of mission or ambassador. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the career options so we understand what diplomats are. And again, careers.state.gov has a lot of detail. So don't worry if you don't catch all the stuff I'm going to say now. Next slide, please. So let's talk Foreign Service officers. And this is what I am. I'm a management officer. There are basically 5 opportunities, no matter what you major in college or what you're doing. So you could be a biology major, or you could be someone in the military who's put in 20 years, and now you decided you want a second career working abroad. Well, you still have one of these 5 options to choose from. Consular, I call the retail. These are the people who, when they're abroad, normally have 2 main functions. One is to deal with issuing visas, which is basically giving permission to someone who's not a US citizen to enter the United States. They're responsible for that, making those decisions based on US laws and also information they gather from the applicant. And the other main charge they have has to do with what we call American Citizen Services. So if someone who is a US citizen is abroad and something happens, good or bad, that's the person they're going to talk to as a consular officer. Another one is management officer. And again, that's what I am. Management officers think of as administrative. So these are the people who handle facility management, IT, even the medical office goes through there. Logistics, housing, anything that is administrative goes through the management office. And we are usually the ones actually that have the largest staff because we have so many diverse things we have to do. Public diplomacy, this is the face. These are the people whose face you will see in the news talking about the US Department of State or the US Foreign Service. They handle all of our social media. They interface with the press. Normally, if we have a VIP visitor, like the president or vice president who's going to be in country, they are normally not going to be more than about 6 or 7 feet from a public diplomacy officer at all times. I saved the last two, political and economic, because I say they're so similar. They're what we call reporting officers. And these are people who gather information and share it with DC and also take messages from DC out to their home country. So they're involved in helping shape policy by providing information to DC. And when decisions are made, they're the ones who have to go and deliver messages or implement it within that country. And if you can really easily think, what's the difference? Economic people work on economic issues, political officers on political issues. The reality is every econ officer I've met in my career at some point has done political work and vice versa. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to go through the detail of all these because there's actually a lot more, but our specialists, when they join US Foreign Service, do come in with skills that are specific to these and other careers. So our constructioneering people have to come in with experience in construction engineering. Our IT people have to come in with experience in IT. So as opposed to the officers, which you can kind of be doing anything, the specialists have to come in with those skill sets to be hired in the first place. But both categories fall in what we call the diplomat category. Next slide, please, which I think is our last one. Yep, it is. So again, I buzzed through this, but you can find this information at careers.state.gov, and some of it will lead you to usajobs.gov if you're trying to find out more about actual careers. If you want to get in touch with me, the best way to do it is shoot me an email at dirsouth@state.gov. And the very first thing I'm going to do is say, did you go to careers.state.gov and do your research? And the reason is because it'll help you understand the context of any answers I give you. So with that said, I'm going to turn over the floor and be done with the presentation and open to any questions when we get to that portion.
Thank you for that. So the next part of this that we wanted to do is we wanted to take some time and ask Alan and Kiara if they would tell us a little about their journeys to get where they are working in diplomacy. So Alan, since you started talking, would you tell us first a little bit about your journey?
Oh, mine was a little bit circuitous, but I'll go ahead and tell you. I'm what they call a mid-career high. So I finished undergrad with a degree in economics, got my MBA in finance, and I wanted to make money. Like most people in MBAs, you want to make money. That's your goal. Go make money. So I followed the money. I started with IBM, and a little bit boring. So I job hopped somewhere else, and I job hopped here, and I was usually making more money. Not always, actually. Sometimes the businesses left me, and that happened when I got to one company called Iridium LLC, which is satellite telecommunications. It was a $6.5 billion startup company. I started there as the finance department, not the finance officer. I was the finance department. We grew from I was number 60. I think we grew to about 600 employees in about a 6-year period. And I was able to work up internally and become the director of business operations for North America, which for us meant Canada, the US, and Mexico. So I was doing soup to nuts, trying to get offices set up and started for this brand new international company. And I had about $600,000 in stock options, and I was planning on retiring early, and we went bankrupt. And I had nothing. I had paper and a child and a mortgage. So I went to Sanctuary, which for me is South Florida, and started my own business because while working for Iridium, some of the skills I had learned was working in Latin American community, and I had got my Spanish a little better. So part of what I was doing down there was consulting with Latin Americans who wanted to enter the US and start their own businesses. And ultimately, while I was doing that, I saw an ad by Colin Powell, who was Secretary of the State at the time, saying, "We're looking for administrative people." And I thought, I'm an administrative person. I mean, I knew foreign service officers, not a lot, but two or three. And I never thought of myself as one. I always thought they were lawyers or something like that, international relations people. So I went to careers.state.gov. Yes, it was around that long ago. And I read, and there's actually, they call it a quiz, but it's an assessment. You put in your interest and it tells you where you fit within the organization. And it said, with one big bar above all the others, management. Said, you are not econ political or anything else. You are a management personality. So like any smart person who's married, I said, Marcella, would you come here and let me explain something to you? What do you think about every 2 to 3 years moving somewhere? Our kids will never have one home. We may be in places where we just learn the language from a little training at our language school. We'll be eating different foods, dealing with different cultures, may have some security issues some places. What do you think about doing that for the next 20 years? And she said, yeah, let's do it. So at that point forward, I started the process and have not looked back.
That's cool. Kiara, how about yourself?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Well, I wish I had as interesting a story as Alan to say about how I ended up here, but I have to say, and while he was talking, I realized that my journey into the Irish, so it's called the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs, but it's effectively the Irish State Department. It's the exact same thing. Started with a presentation just like Alan's when I was at university. So about 15 or 16 years ago, somebody came to my class and spoke. I was studying European studies at the time, and I had done a study abroad year in France, and I had loved it. I knew that I wanted to work abroad and to travel and see new places. And someone came, gave a presentation, and I thought, yep, that is the career for me. So I'm going to apply. Just like the process here in the US, there's a different application process with assessments and interviews, but got through it all. And then because I had studied European studies, I was sent back to Brussels in Belgium very quickly to work on EU affairs for Ireland. So I was working at Ireland's embassy to the EU, and I stayed doing that for a number of years. I returned to Ireland for a little while in between, but just like in the US system, in our system, you tend to stay on the track that you're on. So I went back to Brussels again, a second time. This time I actually left the Irish system for a while, and I went to work for the EU institutions on a secondment. So I wasn't working for Ireland anymore. I was working for the EU as a whole, all 27 countries. So that was a very interesting experience as well, and a real change in mindset to go from working for a very small country. So Ireland has less than 5 million people in total, to working in a very big organization representing more than 400 million people, which is more what it's like, I imagine, to work in the US Foreign Service. But after a number of years in Brussels, at this point, I had racked up more than 10 years in Brussels on my EU track, and decided, decided with my husband as well, as Alan said, it's very much a family, it's a bit of a family job. And it's something that everyone in the family needs to be on board with. My husband is also a Foreign Service officer, which makes it, on the one hand, a little bit easier in terms of explaining the job and the life and the moving and you know, the way decisions are made, but a little bit more complicated in finding places that we can both work together. But we said either, you know, we stay in Brussels or we're going to do something completely different. So we went back to Ireland for a while. And then the opportunity came up for me to go for a consul general position in the US. So Ireland has an embassy to the US in Washington, and then 7 different consulates around the US, as Alan explained so well, that report into Washington. And Atlanta was one of the places that was available and that I could apply for. I had been to the US numerous times, but mainly to further up the East Coast, New York, Washington for work. I'd never been to Atlanta or anywhere in the US, Southeast or South. And that's basically why we went for it, because we said, well, we've never been there. It's a great opportunity to go somewhere new. And that's how we ended up in Atlanta. So moved here a year ago and haven't looked back. It's been a great experience. And I will say that my husband then, who came with me, took time out of his career to look after our kids. We have small children, they're 2 and 4. So they're very much enjoying Atlanta and everything that it has to offer. But you know, in terms of the family, we needed someone to be at home and be around with them while they're so small. So he's been taking some time out of his career. And the idea is that we will swap that out as things move on.
What are some of the challenges that you've experienced? Are there bumps in the road that you've experienced in your careers? Alan, you want to start that one?
Yes and no. And one thing we always say at the U.S. Department of State is it all depends. And you'll start to hear why as I talk, but you're not going to get a lot of straight answers out of me because so much depends on the person. So let me give you a quick example. Let's say you saw modern art on the wall, you and your friend, and they see the modern art. And one of you looks at it and says, oh, I love the color and the design, and it just speaks to my soul. And the other one looks at it and says, my 5-year-old could do that. Well, the art hasn't changed. It's how you perceive it. And what I'd say about the Foreign Service is a lot of things are different than in the US, but how you receive and digest and deal with that makes a big difference. So for example, I mentioned my wife. The reason she was so quick to come abroad is she had lived abroad as a child. She lived in Spain, Colombia. She graduated from high school in Chile. So for her, this is great. Get someone else to pay for all this instead of your father or your husband. But for someone else, this would be excruciating. You mean to tell me I'm going to be away from family? I'm not going to be around my cousins or be able to drop into my mother's house every Sunday for dinner? And that's what I would say about most things in the Foreign Service is they're really not good or bad. They're just different. And it's a personality thing that makes you decide whether or not it's something you like. Now, I will put my little asterisk there and say, yes, there are some things that are clearly bads that happen. But again, they happen in the States sometime as well. We always have to keep that in context.
How about you, Kara?
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that I like about this career so much is the change. So you have to like change and enjoy doing something completely different every couple of years. You know, what I'm doing now here in Atlanta, in the US, has nothing to do really with, you know, on paper, there are similarities, but it has nothing to do with my experiences before. It's a different context, different people, different culture. And that's been something interesting for me, I would say, as an Irish person coming to the US. You know, in Ireland, we follow US TV shows, US music. We speak the same language. We have Gaelic in Ireland, of course, as well, but everyone in Ireland speaks English. On one level, on a superficial level, it's a very easy, you know, transition. But there are lots of cultural differences as well, different systems, different administrative systems. So I would say, in terms of downsides, you know, the logistics of moving yourself every couple of years, and as life goes on, when you're moving kids and you have to, you know, get things lined up for schools and all that kind of stuff, it's logistically complicated. But I think if you enjoy the change and the movement and the getting to know new people, which is fundamentally probably the best thing about the job, I think, getting to meet new people with completely different experiences and perspectives to you. And you kind of, I think you start to thrive off the buzz of that. That's certainly what I found, that you like being somewhere for a few years and then moving and kind of throwing yourself into a new environment, and it's exciting. So yeah, that outweighs the logistical downsides, which can be complicated. And as Alan said, I guess depending on where you are, each country has its own good points and not so good points, but that goes for all of our home countries as well. So I think just keeping that kind of open mind, that in some ways anything can happen anywhere, and just enjoying the experiences as you go through them makes it an enjoyable career for me in any case.
I want to open this up to the students. If you want to unmute yourself or put your question in the chat, we would love to open this up. This is for you, so ask away.
I have a question for Alan. Can you hear?
Go right ahead, I'm ready.
Okay, so in college, I'm in the fall, I'm going to college and I'm going to be majoring in public health. And so what I really wanted my job to be was involve something environmental. And so I know that in Washington, D.C., there's a headquarters for the EPA. And so I wanted to know, I know you were talking about the different careers, like the consular and then the economic and political, how they communicate with Washington, D.C. And so I wanted to know, like which one is like more so involved in like, I guess, communicating and being a part of like Washington, D.C. and I guess just, I don't know, like enforcing like policy, I guess.
So the policy side is definitely, if it's foreign policy, that's going to be the U.S. Department of State. Clearly, that's the agency. There are other agencies that deal with foreign affairs, like intelligence agencies. Those are the biggest example of U.S. agency, CIA. There's a big one everybody knows, but they are not part of the umbrella of U.S. Department of State or U.S. Foreign Service. The military, that's other that deals with foreign affairs a lot. But the bottom line is that if it is policy oriented, that is coming from the White House, it is the U.S. Department of State, and then it is handled by the U.S. Foreign Service. We are the conduit for that policy. Now, if you're talking career, here's the thing, something that can be a little deceptive. If you go to our site, you will see things having to do with medical careers or human resources careers. There are a lot of different career options, but the reality is many of those are short-term assignments. So let's take, for example, we have environmental officers, but these environmental officers might do maybe 5 years working on environmental issues out of a 25-year career. So I would say, don't go to the State Department or Foreign Service planning on being an environmental officer. But if you want to be a political officer involved in policy and spend some time working on environmental issues, that is very possible. This happens most with refugees. I talk to people all the time who like working with refugees. And I say, well, at a 25-year career, you might have 4 or 5 years to do that. But if you want to work regularly with refugees, you might consider USAID or a non-governmental agency, which is more like a charity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have a question from the chat. What is the best way to prepare for the Foreign Service Officer test? Also, how impactful is having a second language when applying? That would be for you, Alan.
Yeah, the first part of the question, I'm going to send you to careers.state.gov because that's going to go through detail. I mean, it's like studying for the SAT as far as the process, but all that information you can find at careers.state.gov. So the second part is a little more what I can address. How impactful is a second language? It will never hurt you to have a foreign language or more. 2 or 3 or 4. It will never hurt you. But ultimately, what's more important is what are you doing with it? So if you travel to France one summer and you learn some French because you spent 2 months in France and you came back with a suntan and not much more, then that's not necessarily going to help you as much as you would think. So if someone else went to Ireland and spent 60 days in Ireland and didn't learn a new language, but they come back and they've learned leadership, organization, cultural adaptability, communication, that's more important. So languages will never hurt you, but they don't always help unless you do something of value with it. Now, like I said, I always have asterisks. We have our own language school. It's called Foreign Service Institute. They not only teach languages, but they teach what we call tradecraft. And these professors, our teachers, because they're not really professors, but our teachers are native speakers in their tongue. So our attitude is we'll teach you whatever language you need. If you are good at learning, we will teach you the language. So I always tell people languages never hurt you, but don't think that's really going to be a huge factor in the hiring.
I have a question. My name is Jessie, and I wanted to say thank you to both Alan and Ciara for your time today. I am preparing for the Foreign Service Officer exam in October, and I wanted to ask Alan, what can an applicant do to set themselves apart? So I have lived on the State Department. I've taken the assessment. I have enrolled in a course, all of that. And this also for me is a mid-career change. I'm older, but this excites me. I'm not American by birth. I'm a naturalized citizen, and the opportunity, the possibility of going abroad is just really exciting. So I'd like to ask what I can do to set myself apart as I go through the process, from the exam to the personal statement to the negotiation, everything that comes after.
All right, so that's a long conversation. What I'm going to do is I just put both of my email addresses. You can shoot me an email and we can set some time to talk individually. But I will take advantage of this one little thing. 2 things you said. One, set yourself apart. Actually, when people are competing, ultimately they're being measured on what we call 13 dimensions. And I rattled off some of those dimensions: leadership, cultural adaptability, your judgment, communication skills. Literally, the assessors have sheets with boxes. And when they ask you questions, they have to fill in those boxes. And that's how they're rating you. So again, doesn't matter if you're a biology major, if you are able to demonstrate strong judgment and the other 13 dimensions. So that's what you're being measured on. Now, I'm also going to point something else out that always keep in mind. This is a general statement in life, so everybody can take this statement away, not just State Department. Anytime you are being assessed by an employer, remember that employer is not focused on you. The employer is focused on what you can do to help that employer. So every single thing you write and every single thing that comes out of your mouth needs to be in context of how you are going to help that employer. So if you did go to France and learn French, you would never say, oh, I want to better my French. What you would say is, I've gotten to a certain point in French. With a little more training, I think I can get to the level where I can represent the US government in sub-Saharan Africa as a consular officer. That's helping Uncle Sam. So with that, Jesse, specifically, just shoot me an email. We'll set a time to talk. But for everybody else who's not as far along in the process, go to careers.state.gov and start learning how the process works. It's very self-contained, very, very good site. So we actually don't want people going too many other places for information because we can't control what they put there and they may put some wrong information in.
Thank you.
Anybody else has questions?
If nobody has a question, I'd like to throw one out to my colleague. You talked a little bit, we call them tandem couples, when we have two people who are both employees. We're bigger. U.S. Foreign Service, like I said, I had 290 posts, so it's a lot easier for tandem couples to find matches. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of those unique experiences that you come across or compromises you have to make when you decide to be a tandem or a dual career?
Thanks. Yeah, that's very true. So it was interesting for me to hear Alan at the beginning describing the US Department of State and the numbers of overseas missions, because Ireland has 80 overseas missions, and that includes 12 consulates and just over 60 embassies and a few other larger types of missions to international organizations. So it's a lot smaller. It's a different context, and we have about 700 personnel serving overseas. So when you divide that out across the 80 missions, it doesn't make for a lot of people in each mission. So there's definitely a compromise involved there. I would say, just as personal, to give a bit of personal flavor to everyone, I actually met my husband on my first day in the Foreign Service. So there's another point of attraction to joining the State Department and the Foreign Service. You never know. We were sitting in the reception in the waiting area on our very first day, waiting to be brought to our training. And in the very beginning, we both opted, you have a certain amount, and it depends on the system, a certain amount of influence over where you go, but you don't have total control. You can express your preferences. As I said, I went to Brussels on my European Union track, and he went to Athens, Greece. So we were both there for 4 years, and we commuted back and forth. And that was about a 3-hour flight. I think in the US context, now I'm learning, being here in a country on such a bigger scale, that's not really that big a deal. In Europe, that's a pretty long flight. But it was a great opportunity. And I have to say, for me, I spent more time going, and he was a consular affairs officer there at that time. So Greece is a busy place to be a consular affairs officer. In pre-COVID times, a lot of students traveling, a lot of young people, a lot of tourists from Ireland there. So he was providing a lot of assistance to people and couldn't leave his post as often as I could. So I used to come down and have some nice weekends on Greek islands, sometimes providing some support and some free labor for the Irish Foreign Service on the side as we help people out who, and as Alan said, on that consular track, people who lose their passports, people who get into problems with the law, people who become ill, who are in hospital. As a consular officer, they are all the things that you're dealing with, and you are like a link between their families back in your home country, the US or Ireland, and where you're at and where they are. So it's a demanding job on the consular side, I would say. It's also very rewarding because you get an instant connection with people, and you can really see where what you're doing is having an impact on someone's life. You can help someone through a very difficult time. You can help a family through a difficult time. Sometimes there's good outcomes and sometimes there is bad outcomes. But if you enjoy helping people, I would say that track is very rewarding while emotionally tough. That was an aside. And then after that, we did manage to get to Brussels at the same time. So a little bit hidden in my story of how I ended up in Brussels for so long was that Ireland has a very big mission there to the European Union. It's our biggest one abroad. So there was the possibility for us both to work there in a mission of that size. In other places, like here in Atlanta in the Irish Consulate, we're a team of 5. There are 2 officers posted from Ireland, and then we have 3 staff who are recruited locally. And we have an interesting portfolio in our 3 locally recruited staff now. I would say we have a woman from New York who moved to Atlanta a number of years ago. We have a woman from Ethiopia who moved to the US, has a green card residency here and has come to work for the Irish Consulate. But she brings an interesting perspective as well as a non-US citizen and as someone who has experienced living abroad. And then we recently recruited a Morehouse graduate, a young graduate here from Atlanta who gives us a great insight into Atlanta as a city and how things work. So we have a good mix, I would say, of people and of perspectives. But with only 2 posted officers, it would be impossible for myself and my husband to both be here in terms of the balance of a small office like this. So for us, for this one, we decided that he would take a break, and that worked for our particular family situation at this time. I would also say that we were talking about this earlier with Alan before the session started. COVID and remote working has thrown up some possibilities for families like mine, where one of us could perhaps work remotely. And in the Irish system, they're actually working on that at the moment, on a policy for people who are accompanying, a tandem couple, or even someone who has a partner who works in the private sector in another job that might involve a move, where the Foreign Service Officer could do a role remotely and check in every now and then physically at the nearest embassy or mission. So the last year, while it's been difficult, and it's been difficult as a diplomat abroad, it's been difficult for me here in Atlanta. I actually arrived in August 2020, and a huge part of my job is supposed to be going out and meeting people in person, making connections for Ireland, getting to know Atlanta and the Southeast US, because we cover 7 states from here, including Alabama. Meeting people, meeting universities, politicians, cultural groups, sporting groups, businesses, Irish companies that are operating here, and companies from the US that want to go to Ireland. So much of it is based on making relationships, getting to know people, helping other people make those connections. So doing all of that virtually has definitely been a challenge, just when we mentioned challenges. But the options for remote working have opened up some possibilities for families like ours. And just to give you a flavor as well of what the life is like. So normally we would be here in Atlanta for 4 years. Then we'll return to Ireland. We'll both work in Ireland at that point in headquarters, just like headquarters here for the US system are DC, Irish headquarters are Dublin, and then go off, 3 to 4 years at home and then off somewhere again. And we will have to see how we manage that with 2 jobs to fill, or if one of us takes a break again. If anyone has any questions, even personal, throw them out there. We're happy to chat offline or separately another time as well.
I want to throw in a little bit from my side, because I actually am an immigration advisor here in the US. I'm what we call a designated school official, and I interface a great deal with US embassies overseas and with the US Department of State and the nature of what I do. And one of the things that's so great about embassies and consulates is when you have the public missions in the US, like the Irish Consul General has been so generous in supporting this program. Some of you that received scholarships, you may not have realized it, but the Consulate General of Ireland sponsored some of the scholarships to participate in this program for Alabama students. So they're about outreach, and that's one of their missions, is to do that outreach. And they do it in a lot of different ways. I've worked with the Ivorian Embassy. There's also a mission out in California and LA. A lot of embassy missions are so small that they would hire a representative. I know a gentleman out in LA. He is the embassy representative for Kenya, Ethiopia, and for Tanzania, because they don't have a large enough staffing and budget to support a full mission. So they might have a regional representative, and sometimes some countries cluster. So the fact that Ireland has 80 missions and the US has 190 plus, that shows how robust their Department of State, composition is, how robust it is. But smaller countries may have a much smaller footprint in that, and may only be able to do like one embassy in the US with representatives. Birmingham, for example, has 20 honorary consuls who are actually US citizens who do a lot of work in the other countries. We have an honorary consul of Japan and Germany that are in Birmingham. And there's about 21 in the state of Alabama that I'm aware of. So they serve, and sometimes they serve representing other countries in helping facilitate some of those connections because they have a lot of experience. So it's just an interesting kind of role, I think, in reverse side diplomacy. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Can I speak quickly about student opportunities? I heard you talk about that a little bit. I didn't go into student opportunities, but I encourage anybody who is a student who's looking at IT specifically, or is looking at a full-time career, to go to careers.state.gov and start looking at some of the student opportunities there. We are hurting very, very badly for IT people specifically, so badly that we have created a 2-year program where we pay them, pay for their tuition and fees for them to get 2 years. So if they're finishing junior college and going on to a 4-year school to get a bachelor's in IT or cybersecurity or something related, they're eligible. Or if they are graduating with their bachelor's and they want to get a 2-year master's degree, they're eligible. Besides paying the tuition and fees, we also have 2 internships for them, one in Maine State, the other would be at an embassy abroad, and then they're guaranteed employment for a minimum of 5 years after that. So there are opportunities out there. The other thing I would say about student opportunities is don't get too narrowly focused on just one agency. So if you can, let's say, apply to 15 different agencies and one of them makes you an offer, take it, because 50% of what you're going to learn at that agency will be directly transferable to another agency that you may want in the future for either an internship or full-time unemployment. All the government internships and jobs are highly competitive just due to the volume. So getting your foot in the door is huge. And I heard the CG mention somebody who I recognized who was apparently gotten his foot in the door at her consulate. And that's a good thing because now he's going to kind of be in the clique. And he's now going to be able to interface with people at other communities, and it'll just be easier year after year to advance in whatever direction he wants.
Are there any other questions? So
do I need to finish out?
Go ahead.
So as a major in digital forensics, I was curious. I'm also a local business owner. So with everything in IT being as remote as it is nowadays, would we be stationed somewhere with an opportunity like that, or would we be left to do most things remote?
No, you're going to be stationed, and that's one thing. What we're seeing an evolution of in the private world is the multiple streams of income concept in the private industry. Government's not there, not even close. So if you do go abroad and work in the U.S. Foreign Service, you would have to get special permission to do anything outside other sources of income that are work related as opposed to investment related. Plus you have to maintain security clearances, and that's crucially important because people may try to get access to you and you might not even know it. So bottom line is it's not very easy to have more than one stream of income when you're abroad. I would assume you're not going to have it. And you should also assume you will be at post. Do changes happen? Yeah, they do. There are exceptions, but you should go in with that assumption you will be going to post.
Awesome, thank you.
Anybody else? Last call. Well, I really want to thank our guest speakers, Alan DeBose and Carol Flynn. We really are grateful for your time. And I'm sure you'll probably be getting some outside emails from others after this. But we're very grateful for your time in coming and joining us today. We thank you so much.